Good day, everyone. I am James Antone J. Baybay, a second-year student taking up BS Criminology. Today, I will discuss about the institutional corrections. So, what is institutional corrections? Why do we study institutional corrections? It is very important to us students who are taking up criminology course to tackle about institutional corrections. It gives us knowledge and ideas on how it rolls to our society today and on how this affect human beings, especially when that person done criminal act. In our lesson, one will discover and know the following topics. So, in lesson 1, we will know the global view of prison administration. We can know its history. So, when these institutional corrections or prisons came from, how do they implement this during ancient times? Next, prison, antiquity to modernity. We will discuss its differences in the times of antiquity and now, today, the modernity, on how prisoners and the prisons, jails, how do these differ, especially in today. Next is the influence of the Roman Catholic Church on how this gives importance and its contributions to our prisons from the past years and for today. Next is Pope John Paul II, the pro-life Pope, on what is his contributions for the prisons and to institutional corrections. Next is the Walnut Street Jail. On what is this Walnut Street Jail? What kind of jail it is? Next is King Henry VIII. On what is his contributions to institutional corrections and to the prisoners. Lastly is King Edward VI, a jewel of King Henry VIII. So we will discuss of what are they related for, or how do they related. Let's proceed to the definition of institutional correction. So institutional corrections refers to the means of correcting an individual by placing him in a prison or jail for his treatment until he is ready for his reintegration into the community. So in this matter, a certain person that has committed crimes will be put into a correcting facility. So this is what we call the institutional corrections. So in institutional corrections, they will put into jail. So jail is defined as a place of confinement for inmates under investigation or undergoing trial or serving short-term sentences. So jail, it has another term, jail or gaol. Institutional corrections also refer to those persons housed in secure correctional facilities compared to jail and prison. Most community programs cost less. Offenders live at home, and in the small number of residential programs where the offender lives and the facility, they help subsidize the cost of living. we have this called jail in order for the some offenders to be secured, because some will rather go to other places and hide their identities in order to go out from their criminality. So this is one solution in order to secure a particular person from committing other crimes. So now, let us see on how our institution implement and make role of the corrections process. So the Philippine correction system and its current and situation issues. The Philippine correction system is composed of the institutions in the government, so civil society, and business sector involved in the confinement, correction, and restoration of persons charged for and convicted of delinquent acts or crimes. So we can see that there are many institutions who are combining its strength to give an effective in implementation of correcting or securing a particular person who have related in criminal act. The public sector formulates sound policies and rules on corrections, penology, and jail management, rehabilitation, and restoration. All prisons or penitentiaries, jails, and detention centers are under the direct control and supervision of the government. The government thus plays a dominant role in the correction and rehabilitation of offenders. So we can see that in our country, Philippines, we always depend to our government. We should always follow and obey rules for us to have an effective and peace community. The civil society, which includes the non-government organizations, people's organizations, religious organizations, academy, and the media, provide support services such as health services, training, livelihood, spiritual guidance, and counseling. It is also active in advocacy and social mobilization for the protection of inmates' human rights and enhancement of access to justice. So, not all people who are in jails are related in criminal act. They are just in the process of corrections or questioning. So in order for them to be out for being in jail, they have to tell all the truth of what just happened in a certain crime incident. So it has also called the human rights in order for us to be rehabilitated and treated fairly, because some institutions or some people who are very abuse of their power in implementing its rules. The business sector has minimal participation in corrections services, but offers tremendous opportunities for improved efficiency and public sector exit options. So we can see that the public sectors has also its contributions to improve and give efficiency to our institutional corrections. On the other hand, we are also have the classes of prisoners. So, what are they? Or who are they? People who commits crimes. So, first is insular or national prisoner. These are the one who is sentenced to a prison term of 3 years and 1 day to death. Provincial prisoner is also another one of classes of prisoners. The one who is sentenced to a prison term of 6 months and 1 day to 3 years. Next is the city prisoner, the one who is sentenced to a prison term of 1 day to 3 years. Lastly is the municipal prisoner, the one who is sentenced to a prison term of 1 day to 6 months. As we can see, the 4 classes of prisoners, the insular or national prisoner has the worst imprisonment because as you can see, you will be imprisoned from the term of 3 years and 1 day until death. So you will be in the prison until you will die. So it is very worst. And for the very least or not worst imprisonment is for the municipal prisoner. You will sentence to a prison in term of just 1 day to 6 months. But still, it is not good for us to be in the jails or imprisonment. So, and there are also 3 types of detainees. Those undergoing investigation, those awaiting or undergoing trial, and lastly are those awaiting for final judgment. So we can say that a certain person will be imprisoned or put into jail because he is still in the process of investigation or in undergoing trial and for awaiting for final judgment. So these 3 detainees, types of detainees, are very important for the implementation of institutional corrections to be effective because as we can see, they have the process, they have the due process for how to give and experience the human rights policies. Let's proceed to the following institution or sectors that help to implement the effectiveness of institutional corrections. Here is the Bureau of Corrections or BUCOR. BUCOR has its principal task, the rehabilitation of national prisoners or those sentenced to serve a term of imprisonment of more than 3 years. Since its creation, the BUCOR has evolved with modern penology and has shifted from the traditional view of imprisonment as society's retribution against criminal offenders into one which regards imprisonment as a humanizing and enriching experiences. So, we will also know the functions of the Bureau of Corrections. The Bureau of Corrections has its functions that confine persons convicted by the courts to serve a sentence in national prisons. Next, they keep prisoners from committing crimes while in custody, provide humane treatment, and engage in agro-industrial projects. As we can see, the Bureau of Corrections also provide the effective ways to change people who are convicted, or they are providing some other activities in order for them to be changed or to change the way they act as they committed a criminal act. Bureau of Corrections also keep prisoners from committing crimes while they are in custody by supplying the inmates basic needs and implementing a variety of rehabilitation programs designed to change their pattern of criminal or antisocial behavior. We already know that there are some corrections, they provide seminars and activities in order for the prisoners to get not think to implement or to act criminal actions again. They have been rehabilitated. They have been talked with some doctors or psychologists to improve themselves in order for them to change. For the purpose of developing prison lands and resources into productive bases or profit centers, developing and employing inmate manpower, skills, and labor, providing prisoners with a source of income, and augmenting the Bureau's yearly appropriations. So the effective way of this is always having the development and the participation of the prisoners, including with their officials. They provide an effective activities, and also they promote source of income. So in this matter, we can say that in some prisons they're having some business in order for some of the prisoners to show their hidden skills. On the other hand, the principal task of the Bureau of Corrections is the rehabilitation of national prisoners. The Bureau also carries out the following tasks to carry out its mandate. And now, let's proceed to another institution or sector that helps implement the effectiveness of institutional corrections here in our country. The Bureau of Jail Management and Penology, or BJMP. So in this agency, under the DILG, was created pursuant to Section 60, Republic Act number 697513, which took effect on January 2, 1991. It is mandated to direct, supervise, and control the administration and operation of all district, city, and municipal jails nationwide. So we can say that the BJMP rolls in all places inside our country. The BJMP, also known as the Jail Bureau, the BJMP has also its functions to show the agency its effectiveness and importance to our country and in our society. The BJMP formulate policies and guidelines on the administration of all district, city, and municipal jails, They also formulate and implement policies for the programs of correction, rehabilitation, and treatment of inmates. They also plan and programs funds for the subsistence allowance of inmates, conduct research, develop and implement plans and programs for the improvement of jail services throughout the country. So we can say both sectors, the Bucor and the BGMP, always shows their provision that to rehabilitate and change prisoners from being a criminal person. They also provide their own allowances, and so we can say that the both sectors are having or giving its strong relationship to each other in order for the institutional corrections in our country effective and more usable to the country. After 12 years of existence as a separate agency under the DILG, the BGMP still shares its responsibilities with the Philippine National Police or PNP. The involvement, however, of the police in penology and jail management is a temporary arrangement in view of BGMP's limited capacity. So we can say despite of the strong sector of BGMP, they also lacks of capacity to implement these offenders and in catching them. So they need the help of another sector or agency, the Philippine National Police. So we'll proceed to the non-institutional corrections. So we can ask, or we could say that there are another institution. This is called the non-institutional corrections. So what is this non-institutional corrections? These corrections is the method of correcting sentenced offenders without having to go to prison. So we can say that there can be called a person as an offender but not in the prison. It focuses on modern community correctional programs of rehabilitation to the exclusion of punishment, deterrence, and incapacitation of criminal offenders. So these two forms of non-institutional corrections are only be done to some prisoners that are selected or granted with this process, probation and parole. Not all of prisoners are granted with this because it depends on how and what kind of crime did that particular person done. So some are allowed to stay in the community subject to conditions imposed by the government. They are either granted probation, parole, conditional pardon, or recognizance. So what I have said, the process of this probation and parole, it can only be granted to those prisoners who have shown their kindness inside the prison. They done good deeds, they have shown the better of themselves. So now let's proceed to the difference between penology and correction. So these two words, we can see that they also differ, but they roll in the same place. So penology the study of punishment for crime or of criminal offenders. So the penology focuses on the study or the process on how they could implement or how they could give this kind of study to the offenders that is related to a crime scene. Next, correction. Correction is the branch of criminal justice system concerned with the custody, supervision, and rehabilitation of criminal offenders. So correction defines the general effectiveness or importance. So it gives custody, the supervision of the offenders, and as well as their rehabilitation. So the offenders in this correction should be rehabilitated. They have given some activities or orientation to change themselves on how they could improve themselves and make a better person. So let us know the facts about the Philippine incarceration. So in 2018, the Philippines held the 6th highest prison population out of 21 Asian countries. So it is quite alarming for us, especially to the government, that the number of prisoners or imprisoned person in our country is getting higher, and it will affect in our country. So the 5 facts about the Philippines incarceration system. First is severe crowding. So in 2016, Rodrigo Duterte won the presidential election and promised to end crime within 6 months. That includes the killings of thousands of criminals. So during the administration of President Duterte, he only shows and give to the people of what he have said during the election. So in this matter, we can say that he's doing well of his propaganda during his election. Then Manila City Jail, the largest jail in the Philippines, is split into dorms that safely house 170 inmates. Currently, these dorms house around 500 people. So we can say that in one jail or one prison room, there's overcrowding. So it gives the higher number of prisoners during the Duterte's administration. We can say that it is effective, but it also result a negative effect, especially to the different jails in our countries. Even this Manila City Jail have its largest jail, but this jail experience the overcrowding. Here are also another big jail or have its large jail in our country, the Quezon City Jail. A room designated for 30 people holds about 130 incarceration. Severe overcrowding in prisons that leads to illness and death tolls in the thousands. So as we can see this, overcrowding shows the very big effect to different jails, especially to this Quezon City Jail. They are having a high death tolls to the prisoners. So it is quite alarming, especially to our government. But during this time, the government, the Philippine government, during the administration of Duterte, they're providing the budget for these jails, different jails in our country, especially in order for the jails to improve and prevent this overcrowding. So next, 5 facts in our Philippine imprisonment is the pre-trial detainees. So these pre-trial detainees, according to the World prison brief. 75.1% of incarceration within the Philippines incarceration system are pre-trial. 2018, there are 141,422 of 188 and 278 prisoners were pre-trial detainees. Unfortunately, many people are serving sentences without conviction. Pre-trial detention is found in judicial systems all over the world. So even if that person is still in the process of trials, he or she should have this imprisonment, or he will become the pre-trial detainees. In countries like ours, the Philippines, people may serve time that outweighs their crimes. On average, prisoners in the Philippines are detained for 9 months without being sentenced. So we can say that in our country, the process of our correction is quite alarming, because if 9 months is a long term or a long days for a person that he will be put into prison without being sentenced. Next is the high death tolls. According to Ernesto Tamayo, about 5,200 inmates die annually at the New Bilibid Prison, or NBP. The hospital medical chief also added that these deaths are due to overcrowding, dirty living conditions, inmate violence, and uncontrollable outbreaks of pulmonary tuberculosis and lacks of nutritional food and basic health care. So we can say that during this Duterte's administration resulted a very alarming, because it made the prisoners to be killed inside the prison. It only shows an alarming to the government that it should be solved and improved. Next is the vigilante justice. Duterte's war on drugs made jobless citizens recruited to kill anyone suspected of dealing, buying, or using drugs. Some people make this way to make money, and many homeless and impoverished people join the vigilante teams. In 2016, the Philippines Police Force and unidentified gunmen have killed 7,000 known drug dealers and users since Duterte's presidency. We can only see that this process is not good, but for the society, in order to have peace and an effective workplace, to minimize the number of high criminals or high profile criminals, this is one way of how our government solve. But in this process, it involves the human rights policies. They are not thinking of the family of those who were killed by the vigilante group. So it must be in a due process. Next is corruption. 2018, the public learned a former mayor may have been released from prison or for good behavior that was charged for rape and homicide in 1993. Similar stories of corruption in the Philippines prisons continued to emerge. So we can say that even if inside in the prison or in the jails, there are the existence of corruption. It is within the officials inside the prison. So it must be stopped, and it must be given solutions. Senators stated that inmates could live like kings for a free prison workers, and officials were taking bribes to bring and distribute contraband to inmates like cigarettes, cell phones, and television. On other hand, Inmates who cannot afford a better life within the prison are stuck in overcrowded and dirty rooms and have a higher rate of becoming ill and death. Now that the corruption has been unearthed, officials are taking steps to weed it out, one prison at a time. So, it is a good news that our government showing its solution to this prisoner corruption. But it is not easy because there are many jails in our country. But still, they are giving its solutions to improve and stop this kind of corruption. Next, we will talk about the global view of prison administration. We will see of its history and how it rolls to a certain community and from other countries. The implementation of incarceration came from the different procedures and punishments. It depends on what generations they have belonged and practiced. Globally, as the time passed by, many countries that have its own way of improving and changes to their imprisonment. The ancient civilizations have been making their prisoners as their slaves. There are also some justice systems, observing with exceptions to those people without trial shall not be imprisoned. During ancient times, their prisoners were held in the poorly isolated buildings where they could often visit by their family and friends. Majority of prisoners continued to build with almost exclusively underground with tight and claustrophobic passageways and cells. So in the ancient civilizations, we can see that their process of implementation of this having the corrections of prisoners is very harassed. These have always been observed by this civilization. Imprisonment disproportional affects individuals and families living in poverty. When an income-generating member of the family is imprisoned, the rest of the family must adjust to this loss of income. Prisoners were almost always stationed in the underground dungeons, where guilty or suspected criminals spent their life awaiting death sentence to become galley slaves. Their prisoners continued to use harsher methods and built high walls or bars, but simple wooden blocks that were attached to their feet. The impact can be especially severe in poor, developing countries where the state does not provide financial assistance to the indigent and where it is not unusual for one breadwinner to financially support and extend family network. The family experiences financial losses as a result of the imprisonment of one of its members, exacerbated by the new expenses that must be met, such as the cost of a lawyer, food for the imprisoned person. It is essential to know when considering the cost of imprisonment. Account needs to be taken and the indirect costs. Ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt. The earliest records of prisons come from the first millennia BC or before Christ. Prisons were almost always stationed in the underground dungeons. Then, the modern democracy Greece. Their prisoners were held in the poorly isolated buildings. Primary source of their detention were not dungeons, high walls or bars, but simple wooden blocks. Also in the ancient Roman Empire, there are prisoners continued to use harsher methods. And now let's proceed to the difference of prison from antiquity to modernity. So the prison conditions of 16th to 20th century, the European prisons remained harsh until English royalty started being more involved with their justice system. Henry II commissioned the construction of prison in 1166, together with the first draft of English legal system that used concept of injury. One of the most historic prison legislations was introduced in 1215. When King John signed Magna Carta, which started that no one could be imprisoned without trial, English prisons became overcrowded and new penal measures started being implemented. Military pardon and penal transportations. So in the countries of North America, Australia, France, and Russia, they are still implementing and adopting this process that the prisoners of these countries practice the penal colonies, especially to the infamous prison Devil's Island in French Guiana and in the frozen northeast Siberia of Russia. Legal understanding of prison was not what resulted for all classes and social groups. Though it was unintentional, prisons became yet another form of punishment to the masses. Prison structure was governed on logic, with different types of prisons to separate the accused from the condemned. Every individual who experience imprisonment have different treatment due to the kind of class they belong. So as we can say, to the global view of administration, they have the kind of imprisonment or incarceration of being harassed, and their facilities are made with walls and blocks. And now, as we can see the overview of the institutional corrections, they have shown different importance and provides us the knowledge on how it gives an important role to our society and every government. I can say that from the past administration, they changes from time to time. Every civilizations and country has its different ways of implementing imprisonment or incarceration. It is very clear that if you belong to a poor family, you will directly become as slaves during the ancient times. It only shows that the way of living during ancient times was very hard. You should have a strong mind and body in order for you to survive. They only give a good treatment to those family that have related to the kings or having its dynasties. On the other hand, if you commit a certain crime, you will definitely experience harassment and become slaves. You will always be treated with harsher methods and put to a certain prison that has very small and dirty room. In order to prevent in becoming a prisoner, you should done or work always correctly and act normally and follow the orders as of the administration. As a student and still in the process of learning things in life, we should always consider the importance of educating ourselves. We should take responsibilities and study hard in order to fulfill our dreams in life. We can say that for today's generation, many things have changed. Even the personality and the way of life of a person, and also the way our government govern his country, on how he could provide and give us an efficient and peace community. And now, as we have already the idea on how a global view on prison administration implements its rules and how it rules to the community from the ancient civilization, we have observed that every ancient civilization have its different stages or ways on how they provide their people in implementing the way their imprisonment ruled to their community. So in that matter, it is always having a harassment or a lack of facilities. And we also observe that the ancient civilization shows that those people that having for example, if you are the son of a king or you belong to a certain kingdom or having a dynasty, you will have an efficient way of living. And you have observed during the ancient civilization, only the people that belongs to a royal family will experience the joyful and happy life. And in behalf of the poor people, they will also suffer an experience of poor housing ways. For example, for their food, they have lack of food, their clothing, and also in their housing. So we can say that during these times of civilization, it is very hard to live when you belong to a poor family. And for that matter, it is very important, especially nowadays, to be responsible and make hard works to fulfill your dreams in life. And as a student, it is very important to us to give the importance of studying hard and have the development of ourselves, and in connection to these institutional corrections, in order for us to prevent from being in prison, we should always take and think on every decisions in our lives to prevent to have related in crimes. So for us, it is very important to learn these kind of things for us to be aware and have the ideas of the possible outcomes if we have encountered these kinds of things. On the other hand, these topics is very important because nowadays it has a lot of numbers of person who have related crimes, and it is very important on how we could prevent this and minimize these kinds of actions. And I believe in this administration, he give this his responsibility to prevent and minimize the criminalities in our country. Even though in this administration there are still lapses and experience its abusive powers, but still they are still giving and provide the efficient and peace and order to our community. During this administration, we all know for its changes and improvements, but still it is experiencing its lapses. Let us go back to the importance of institutional corrections. We'll come to our minds thinking that what if these kinds of institution is not existing. So we will experience horrible things or harassment, and maybe we're always experiencing war. That's why this kind of institution is very important and gives a big effect to the community. Any country and states are always adapting and having its improvement in order to have its effectiveness and efficient way of governance. These institutional corrections gives us the way of having a better life or a good life, because it provides the guidance and protection, especially each one of us. On the other hand, the prisoners or a certain prison, a certain person who have related on criminal act, it is good that they are rehabilitated, given seminars or orientations for the betterment of themselves. So, if you have been encountering or having this kind of situation to your community, so we should not discriminate them, because we all know that everyone deserves a second chance. People change from time to time. So let us understand and be a professional person. Let's make them and help them to improve themselves, especially if that person is related to you. We should treat them as our family, our friends, and also for them to know that for themselves that they are still having the chance for themselves, because some of them inside the prison are having its suicidal factors that also give a problem to the officials on how they could prevent this and give its solutions. So it is very important to tackle this kind of topics in order for us to provide and give ideas, even if we're still in the process of learning. Being a student, we have the right to provide and give our thoughts or ideas. And for our teachers, they also provide us guidance and learnings. And for that, it should be united together. So, in these topics, for me, it is an effective way of having the self-confidence. For this discussion, it gives us the potentials in ourselves. It relieves within ourselves for our secret skills or ideas. So for this, it is very important to put this in our minds and learn on it. So let us be responsible as an individual existing to this community and society. As I have discussed those topics, I hope that you have understand and learned something. The continuation of my discussion for the rest of the topics will be seen from my next video. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to wear mask all the time. Keep safe and God bless.